Hey everybody, welcome back to the SAC Weekly Show. I'm your host Ezeco, and this is the show where we break down virtual college football in the virtual SEC. This is not real football. I know it's getting close, guys. We're less than a month away. I know everybody's excited. You're probably searching through YouTube and maybe for some strange reason have stumbled upon this. You're like, what is going on here? This is not real football. But if you check out the description, you can check out our website, hang out with us on Discord a little bit, look at everything. It's a really fun time. You might be able to find a team that you're interested in, take over one for yourself, and compete for the national championship. We are getting close to the end of our season, really getting ready for college basketball to ramp in as well, and things are starting to get interesting around the country. But we're just going to focus on the SEC here. So let's go ahead and get it started. It is a packed slate today, as you can see them all just strolling in. Every single team is playing except for number 8, Georgia. That's because it's Cupcake Week. That's right. It's the week we all rack up a win, just an automatic win, just something to tick on your schedule, really take the week off and just kind of, yeah, we won this week. With the exception of two teams that apparently didn't get the memo about this, and that's uh, Texas A&M taking on number 20 Miami of Ohio, and Mississippi State, who's visiting Virginia Tech. Those two apparently didn't get the memo that it's Cupcake Week. So those are the only two games we're really going to be diving into because they're going to be interesting. But outside of that, the rest of them, I mean, they're pretty much automatic wins. We've got four teams in the top 25 this week, with leading off number 1, Tennessee, followed straight behind number 2, Auburn. It's been like that for a few weeks now. Don't see it changing much until the SEC championship, when those two are probably going to meet. Um, then we've got Georgia coming in at number 8, and South Carolina. I left them also loose, but South Carolina is number 22 in this as well, or somewhere in there. So we've got four teams in the top 25 this week, and three of those teams are playoff contenders. If the season were to end right now and they were just to take the top 12 teams in the college football playoff poll, that would be Tennessee, Auburn, and Georgia in the playoff. But there is another team strangely in the top 25 for the college football playoff poll, and that is Kentucky. So there's a little bit of an interesting mix there that we're going to talk about later. But we've got four teams in the top 25 AP. We've got four teams in the top 25 college playoff football poll. Uh, Same teams except for one mix, Kentucky and South Carolina, uh, kind of swapping off there. But let's dive right into the games. It's going to be Mississippi State taking on Virginia Tech, and Mississippi State's going to take this one. It's not exactly super easy, but they do take it 27-17. That's going to improve their record to 6-3 on the season. Mike Hugh has a great day. He goes 26 of 44 on his passing, 337 yards with 2 touchdowns. He only throws 1 interception. Chris Robles. The Mississippi State is really a running team. Um, nope, I take that back. I'm thinking of the wrong team. Mississippi State it's a decent team. You know, they're 5-3. They kind of slipped a little bit as they got into SEC play. That's all their losses have been, are all SEC teams. Um, this was a tough matchup for them, with Virginia Tech also kind of being the same team and kind of in that same range. But, Chris Robles comes out, runs the ball 23 times, has 55 rushing yards. He catches the ball 6 times for 103 yards with a touchdown to add to that. Uh, all in all, on the day, Mississippi State's going to have 40 rushing attempts for 111 yards, which is not great, of course, but they do get the touchdown out of it, and they get 2 touchdowns out of the air, which is more than enough to take this one against Virginia Tech. They throw the defense takes away 2 interceptions, and they do recover 2 fumbles, so that really helps you on a decent offensive day. Your defense on a decent offensive day, your defense comes out and plays excellent as well. And your special teams hits 3 of their extra points. All 3 of them hits 2 of their 3 field goals. The longest one coming from 24. I believe their miss was from 40-something yards or 50 yards. You can't do much about that. You can't fault the 50-yard miss, though you do want to see your special teams a little bit more perfect. Hey. Virginia Tech, Jason Lugo throws for 207 yards. He also runs it for 39 yards. He throws a touchdown, and he throws the 2 interceptions that we talked about. Virginia Tech is led by wide receiver PJ Ivory, who only has 3 catches, but he has 72 yards and a touchdown out of it. And their leading rusher, 22 rushes for James Livingston, 74 rushing yards. He gets a touchdown from the ground, 4 catches through the air for 37 yards as well. Their passing game was more efficient. They go 80% with 18 of 31, 207 yards though. Get 1 touchdown. They throw the 2 interceptions. They only run the ball 30 times for 127 yards. So much more efficient than Mississippi State, but still not nearly enough. They get a touchdown through the ground as well. Defensively, they get a sack on Mississippi State, and they take away an interception. Special teams does really good with the 2 extra points, and they do miss a field goal, but that doesn't really make a difference because you needed another touchdown to do anything in this game. So Mississippi State goes out. They take this game away from Virginia Tech on the road at Virginia Tech. So that's a good win for Mississippi State on the road. Taking it the next one, it's Texas A&M hosting Miami of Ohio, and they squeak this one out. Miami came into this game 7-2. Texas A&M went in as Texas A&M does at 4-4, and they take this one away in College Station. They use the home field advantage to their advantage. Jordan Peterson for Texas A&M, of course, leads their passing attack for 232 yards, 22 of 41 completions. Not the most efficient day, but you can't argue with the result. He gets 72 rushing yards as well, and he takes 1 into the end zone for himself. Reyes Thomas, the running back, is going to score their other touchdown from the ground with 11 rush attempts and 51 rush yards. He also has 4 catches and 26 rushing yards. 4 catches and 26 receiving yards. On the day, they throw the 2 interceptions. They run 28 times total for 148 yards and only 232 passing yards. I mean, it wasn't a super powerhouse offensive game plan from either team. It also wasn't a great defensive game either. Texas A&M takes away the 1 interception from Miami, but there wasn't a ton of tackles in this game either. It really just wasn't a super efficient game from either team. It was a sloppy game. But I feel like that's where Texas A&M always kind of wins. When both teams play sloppy, Texas A&M just usually plays less sloppy. Special teams, they miss the extra point. They make the 1 field goal from 22. That ends up being the difference, is the made field goal. And the 1 missed field goal that they had was, strangely enough, from 68 yards out. So I'm not even really going to count that one against them because they tried to kick it from the opposite side of the field halfway down. Whatever. Sure, shoot your shot. They actually won this game within the last minute. Jordan Peterson, his 1 rushing touchdown was run into the end zone at 45-second mark. So they won this one at the very end. Miami doesn't have, a great game either. Randy Weiser throws for 126 passing yards, runs it for 26, throws a touchdown and an interception. They're led by Buster Paulino, who has 6 catches and 36 yards. He catches a touchdown. And then Devin Dunn runs the ball 12 times, 46 rush yards, and a touchdown. It's all kind of there, It just wasn't really a great game from either team, but they did win. And what that means, when we check the rest of the scoreboard, as you can see, the rest of the cupcake games, not a single SEC team lost this week. That includes Vanderbilt. They host Mercer, and they take the easy win that they're supposed to take. Notable scores here is Kentucky with the 65-3 against Furman after that 27-24 loss against Tennessee last week. Tennessee also one of the only other teams to go on the road, and they go on the road to the Cupcake Chattanooga and blow them out 60-0. LSU taking a 55-7 victory, and Ole Miss blowing out Grambling 48-0. There's not a ton of notable scores on here, except for, like I said, the Tennessee absolute blowout and the Kentucky blowout. Those two are the most notable scores in a slate of games that should be blowouts, that should be these type of scores. So those are interesting, and we'll kind of talk about those maybe a little bit. But we're going to take it to our player of the week, and that's going to be Michael Oliveros. That's right. Those of you who know I coach Kentucky, I'm giving the Kentucky player the player of the week. If you don't like it, you can make your own show. But Michael threw 15 completions out of his 17 attempts. He threw for 145 yards. He threw 4 touchdowns. He ran the ball 17 times for 119 yards, and they rout Furman 65-3 on a bounce back heartbreaker from Tennessee 27-24. There's hard to argue this week with a more efficient game. There's certainly guys who put up more yardage, maybe guys who put up a little bit more varied in, they threw some touchdowns and they ran some touchdowns. But there's hard to argue this week on a guy who's a more efficient. Even though it's a cupcake game, it's still super impressive, and I kind of had to pick somebody, so yeah, pick my guy. I'd like to hear what other people think could have been better, because I always feel bad about picking my own guy. I'm interested to hear who anybody else thinks would be a viable player of the week, but I'm going with Michael. Go, Michael. That's our one. Great job. So we're going to check in with the standings real quick because we've been gone for a few weeks. It's kind of what we really expected the last time we did this show. Auburn 9-0, 5-0 in the SEC, taking the mantle of the West. They probably have this one cinched up by now because I believe they've already beaten Ole Miss, and with only 3 SEC games left, I can't see them losing all 3 and then Ole Miss winning all 3 of their 2 remaining games. I don't see that happening. Tennessee leading the East, not quite clinched because they do still have to play Georgia towards the end of the season, but you could probably lock it in. The only difficult part there is the Georgia-Tennessee game that's coming up in a few weeks. That's going to be the decider. Georgia has lost their one game, and I can't honestly recall to who right now, but that's going to be the deciding game. Is the Georgia-Tennessee, that'll be the SEC East Division Championship game. Ole Miss bringing up second in the West. That's really good for them. We asked if Ole Miss could sustain some success. So far, they have answered that question in the affirmative. They can continue to improve on that with a few more games. But sitting at second in the SEC West in this late of the season is a big improvement for them. LSU right behind them, 3-3 in the SEC. Texas A&M also 3-3, pulling up fourth. Mississippi State in at fifth. Kind of a fall off since they've gotten into the SEC play schedule. Still 6-3, but all 3 of their losses are in the SEC. Arkansas coming in at 2-4, and then Alabama bringing up the rear 1-4. However, look out for Alabama right now because they are on a 3-game win streak, and that one win is currently against LSU. They've beaten Virginia. They beat LSU, and then, of course, this week they beat Alabama State, which is no surprise. But Alabama has probably figured it out. They're getting back to on a roll. So if you have to play them soon, watch out. That is not a scratch-off game like we thought it would have been a few weeks ago. Alabama may be back, and they may be just as dangerous as they were before. South Carolina pulling up third in the SEC East. Kentucky right behind them at fourth. Those 2 have not played, so that's going to be a decider game. Of course, Georgia and Tennessee have both beaten Kentucky. I can't recall the South Carolina schedule right now, but It really is just Georgia and Tennessee taking the mantle of the East right now. Florida right behind them with 2-4. In fifth place, Missouri down at 6 at 1-4 in the SEC, and Vanderbilt has resumed its title as the worst team in the SEC at 0-5. Their only 2 wins coming in out of conference play, including just this week as they get their second win of the season. So now we're going to ask some questions. Auburn, we know Auburn's won the West. There's really no question. They're going to be in Atlanta. But the question now is Andrew Moncrief running away with the Heisman? Brandon Savage is kind of his only challenger. At this point, it's only those 2 quarterbacks really headlining the Heisman race. Moncrief and Auburn do have 1 game more than Tennessee right now. They have 9 games and Tennessee only has 8. So the points are maybe a little skewed, but it's still pretty far away from Savage. So is Andrew Moncrief running away with the Heisman, and is Auburn going to complete the treble of SEC West, SEC champion, and Heisman, and then do something spectacular and run through the entire playoffs and possibly a quabble, and that's a word I just made up, and take a national championship? That's a real possibility for Auburn right now. Ole Miss, I mean, what do you do right now? You did improve on your season from last year. You've answered the questions that, yes, you can be competitive in the league, but you're still behind where you need to be to challenge for the SEC West. And that's not really an indication about Ole Miss. It's more of an indication of how far ahead Auburn is from everybody. So Ole Miss has got to ask themselves, what can we do to take that next step? What can we do to get on Auburn's level and continue to propel ourselves as a real challenger in the SEC West? And for Alabama, we talked about how they have 3 wins now. They've only got 6 losses. Is a bowl game still in the cards for Alabama? You didn't think that would be the case a couple weeks ago with them just at 0-6, getting not necessarily blown out of every game, but it took them 3 or 4 weeks to even score a touchdown. Alabama has a shot to go bowling right now, which is a crazy thing to say about the defending national champions, but we're going to say it anyway, that from a season where they were the worst SEC team, they now have a chance to go bowling. So, over in the East, Tennessee, same question. And same question for Georgia. Can Tennessee be stopped? Is Georgia the team to stop them? Can Georgia contend for the East ahead of schedule from what we expected when we saw last year? I mean, they're already ahead of schedule, but they have a chance right now to take the East and go to Atlanta and play against Auburn for the SEC title, which is not where you thought they would be this year. So, we've asked this question. This is probably the 3rd or 4th time we've asked this question. Is Georgia an East contender, a true East contender when they go to play Tennessee? And can Tennessee be stopped at all? Is anybody in this league going to beat Tennessee? Now, the last question in the East is something we talked about earlier with the college football playoff and the AP poll rankings. Both Kentucky and South Carolina are in those late 20s rankings. They both have big games coming up, including against each other. If they both if one of them can win out those last few games, do they have a chance to climb those college football playoff rankings and sneak into the back end spot of the playoffs? What we're seeing right now is that the coaches poll is valuing South Carolina, who does have more wins. However, the college football playoff is valuing Kentucky, and it's valuing the SEC as a whole based on strength of schedule and a few other things. But those 2 teams have a shot at a backdoor into the college football playoff, similar to what we saw with TCU and Kansas State, one of them possibly sneaking into that 12th spot, which one of them did, if I recall correctly. And it's just interesting that even with those losses, even with being out of the SEC East race, there was definitely something to still play for and something of a surprise in that. So, that being said, especially that, we're going to check in with next week and we're going to answer some of those questions immediately. Number 8, Georgia is going to take on number 22, South Carolina. Kentucky is going to take on Alabama. LSU is going to host Florida. Missouri is going to host number 1, Tennessee. Texas A&M is going to take on Mississippi State. And Vanderbilt's going to host number 2, Auburn. We could pencil some of these results in, right? Like, we know Auburn's going to beat the snot out of Vanderbilt. We know Tennessee's going to wipe the floor with Missouri. But the LSU Florida game, of course, is interesting. And I keep saying these are benchmark games. It's really late in the season to have benchmark games, but these two programs are kind of on the same level right now. Florida can try to get themselves to a winning record. They can try and get bowling. LSU can do the same thing. Texas A&M, Mississippi State, both competing for 500 records, which are both above 500, but they're competing for to stay above 500 and to go bowling. But the two most interesting games on this slate are the Georgia-South Carolina game, which of course is the top 25 matchup, and the Kentucky-Alabama game. The Kentucky-Alabama game, perhaps on paper, is not the most interesting, but knowing what we know about Alabama, the defending national champions, 3 wins in a row, getting really hot right now, and with Kentucky having that possible backdoor into the playoff discussion, this game becomes a lot more interesting than what it is on paper. So I'm going to work here for just a minute. I don't have any graphics for this, and I don't usually work on this screen very much. But these are 2 games. These are 2 big games this week that we have to talk about. The interesting part about it is, if we look at South Carolina and Georgia, we're just going to work off that game first because it's the marquee paper matchup. South Carolina, of course, is 6-2. Georgia is 7-1. South Carolina is really mostly out of the SEC race. Beating Georgia could lock up the Division 4 Tennessee more than it could get South Carolina back into the conversation. But for Georgia to beat South Carolina, of course, at home would keep them in contention for the division title. But South Carolina, points per game, they're number 22 in the country. Georgia is number 11. So still working with both top 25 teams here. Now points against, South Carolina is number 161 in the country. Georgia is 131. They both give up quite a few points in comparison to the rest of the country. But point differential, it kind of comes back. South Carolina is number 58 in point differential. Georgia is number 26. So this is still going to be a really competitive game. At home, Georgia has scored 156 points this season. And with their 8 games, that's 19.5 points at home this season. South Carolina has only scored 76 on the road, which is only 9.5. So on paper, in theory, Georgia's going to win this game by twice the score. But it's still an SEC game. It's still a divisional game. It's still a rivalry. And both of these teams are really good and it's going to be explosive. Now, I'm going to spend a little bit longer on Kentucky versus Alabama, partially because I'm, of course, invested in it, partially because Sweezy asked me to. Kentucky, Alabama. We talked about Alabama. Really hot right now. I'm not going to say hottest team in the country, but they are in a 3-game win streak, beating Virginia, beating LSU, beating Alabama State. You knew they were going to beat Alabama State. They've got they are scoring 17.4 points per game this season, which doesn't sound like a lot. In fact, it's 114th in the country. But I want you to consider that for their first 4 games, they didn't score a touchdown. I think their most points in those 4 games, those first 4 games, were like 9 or 12 points. So Those first 4 weeks, they've only scored 9 points at most, and now they're at 17.5 points per game. How many points have they been scoring in the last 4 or 5 weeks since the start of the season? That is scary for any team who has to play them right now. Points against, they're giving up 21.8 points per game. I don't have a whole ton of metrics on that. I know they've given up a ton of points, so that's still a concern. And their point differential is negative 4.3. They are in the bottom tier of the country in all of these rankings. But if I was smart enough, which I'm not, I would have sequestered this to just the last 3 games. What does Alabama look like in just the last 3 weeks? And I mean, honestly, no, I can tell you that. In the last 3 weeks, if you took out the entire first 6 weeks of this season, Alabama is now number 9 in the country in points per game. They're scoring 33.75 points per game just in the last 3 weeks. Weeks 7, 8, and 9. And 10? 8, 9, and 10. Weeks 8, 9, and 10. That's a crazy improvement, as I'm sure you all know. Okay, so this is actually the last 4 weeks. No, let's take that out. See, this is going to sound choppy, guys. I'm doing this on the fly because Sweezy asked me to. So weeks 8, 9, and 10, just the last 3 weeks of the season, all 3 games that Alabama's won. They're number 13 in the country, scoring over 33.5 points per game. Defensively, they're 17th in the country, only allowing 8.5 points per game. Do you hear the difference in that? That's a huge swing. They went from over 100, the very bottom of the country, to very near the top. Now they're going to be on the road. On the road, they have not played on the road these last 3 games. Neither has Kentucky. So that's a difficult metric to deal with, considering you don't have anything to work with there. And the last 3 teams that Alabama has played are 300 winning percentage. If we take out the first 6 weeks of the season, Kentucky's opponents this season, just the last 3 weeks, are 600. Kentucky's points per game are number 4 in the country. They're scoring 41 points per game in the last 3 weeks. Points against is a little bit more difficult. They're number 73, giving up 16.3 per game. But they're also, honestly, not that great at it anyway, because I'm about to undo all of this and show you what their season long is. But point differential, they're number 5 in the country. Their point differential is 24.5. Right above them is Alabama at number 4 with 25 point differential. I can't. It's so difficult to quantify the amount of improvement that Alabama has had within the last 3 weeks. And when we just compare these 2 teams on paper through that time, this becomes one of the most intriguing matchups in the entire country. In my opinion, maybe a biased opinion, but I think it is. Now, I'm going to undo all that. We're going to see what Kentucky's stats are on the entire season. They're number 2 in the country at points per game. 37.5 points scored over their 8 games this season. Defensively, they're giving up 22 points per game, to ranked 147. But there's so many points scored in the SEC. So many teams within the SEC are high up in that points per game that naturally the points against per game are going to be much lower. Point differential per game, Kentucky is number 7 in the country at 15.5 point differential. I mean, Now, if we go back and we look at how many points Kentucky has scored at home this season, is 205. They have had 205 points at home. They have played 5 home games. That's 41 points per game at home. Now, Alabama has played 4 games on the road. They have lost all 4 of them, and they scored 19 points on the road total, which is 4.75 points per game. Now, again, this is not the same Alabama team that has been for the last few weeks, but perhaps it does raise a question: has Alabama been so hot because they've been playing at home? Is this a misnomer that when they go back on the road, they're going to get waxed again? I don't think so. I'm not saying that. And right now, I'm knocking on wood. You guys hear me? You hear me? I am knocking on all the wood in my house to say that that is not the case. But it is a question that has to be answered. Then one more interesting set of these 4 teams that we're looking at: South Carolina, Georgia, Kentucky, Alabama. If we look at opponent winning percentage, Alabama has the lowest of that. Their opponents are exactly at 500, and they are 3-6 on the season. Georgia is right above that. Their opponents' winning percentage is 533, and they're 7-1 on the season. South Carolina opponent winning percentage 571. They are 6-2, and Kentucky is number 1, and they are, of course, 5-3. In fact, just to clean that up even more, in terms of opponent winning percentage, Tennessee, of course, is number 2 in the country. Their opponents are 694, so of course they're going to be first in the SEC. Auburn right below, Texas A&M and Missouri right below them at 671 and 633. Those 2 teams, of course, Texas A&M 5-4, Missouri 2-6, and Auburn is number 4 in the SEC with strength of schedule. Their opponents are 592. Obviously, they're 9-0. And then Kentucky is number 5 in strength and schedule in the SEC. Their opponents have a 590 winning percentage, and in fact, Kentucky is number 20 in the country in strength of schedule. There's a lot of stats that I'm throwing out. I don't know if they're really going to mean anything, but they're super interesting, and I really just need something to play for this late in the season. There's a whole bunch of other things you can look at here that if we just stay with this Kentucky-Alabama matchup, which again, I think if you just take away the last 3 weeks, is the most intriguing on paper. Kentucky has thrown, or on offense, has given up 19 turnovers on the season. Alabama has 11. So that's pretty good, right? One would say. They are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They're 11th in the SEC in terms of turnovers from the defensive end. Kentucky is fairly low. In fact, they're 12th in the SEC in terms of turning the ball over. So that's a rough one for Kentucky fans. You're going up against a team who's pretty good at taking the ball away, and you're not great at taking care of it. Offensively, Kentucky's putting up a ton of yardage, of course. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th, right in the middle of the SEC with 3,751 offensive yards. Alabama all the way at the very bottom with 2,685, and they're giving up over 3,000. And Kentucky's also giving up over 3,000. So it's kind of a give and take there. Passing wise, Kentucky's very even. They've thrown the ball 2,200 yards. They've run the ball 1,500 yards. Alabama has thrown the ball 1,600 yards and rushed it only 1,000. They're giving up 2,000 passing yards. Kentucky's giving up 2,200 passing yards. But on the ground, Kentucky's only given up 938 yards, and Alabama has given up 1,260. You can listen to those stats. You can do what you want with it. Offensively, sacks-wise, Kentucky only has taken 4 sacks on the entire season. They've also only thrown 4 interceptions on the season. Alabama has given up 13 sacks and thrown 8 interceptions. Defensively, Kentucky has sacked 13 times, and they've taken away 16 interceptions, which is second most in the SEC. Sacks-wise, they're right in the middle. They're right about 7 again. And then Alabama has also sacked quarterbacks 13 times, and they've taken away only 8 interceptions, which is 5th in the SEC. Again, a lot of stats, but super interesting right now to watch these two teams go into Lexington and have possibly one of the most potentially impactful games in terms of the back door to the playoffs that may be happening this week. I don't look much about the SEC, so I don't know if that's actually true, but it is definitely true for SEC. So that's what next week is. But in terms of last week, still staying with it, recruiting, there's a lot going on, and I'm not doing good. There's a lot of the SEC not doing great. We only have 2 teams in the SEC weekly recruiting rankings, but those 2 teams themselves are doing great. Tennessee is leading the country right now, and I would think in most metrics, Tennessee is leading the country in terms of recruiting. They've got a ton of 5 stars coming in, and wide receivers, quarterbacks. I mean, Tennessee is going to be dangerous. It kind of sucks. Florida has also been roping in a really nice recruiting class. They've got 12 recruits, right in the mix of everybody else for a really good class for 2024. They're going to be dangerous here in a couple of years, and could be what Georgia is right now in a couple of years. In terms of what people picked up, only 1 4-star came off the board to come to the SEC, but we're really getting into the kind of dregs. That's not really a good word. That's not a great word in general, but most of the big names have come off the board. Your 4 stars, your 5 stars are mostly spoken for at this point. It's going to be a lot of 3 stars. I'm not putting 2 stars on this board because if I did, we would be here all day. But we're getting into that part of the recruiting season where most teams are just trying to fill out the rest of their recruiting. But Georgia pulls in a 4-star strong safety. Auburn's going to pull in a 3-star quarterback and a 3-star strong safety as well as a punter. Florida's going to pull in 3 2-star centers, both coming from Florida. Texas A&M is going to pull in 2 3-star running backs. Ole Miss, a defensive tackle and a running back. Mississippi State pulls in a running back. Vanderbilt beefing up that defensive line, or trying to anyway. South Carolina doing the same with the defensive backs. LSU trying to get some depth to their offensive line. Tennessee really just pounding both sides of the ball like they've been doing and going all over the country. They pull a guy from South Dakota of all places. And Alabama still not gone away with pulling in a 3-star quarterback. The bottom square there, for those of you who tuned in last time, is for us to watch Texas and Oklahoma, who will be coming to the SEC next season, of course, but they do not secure any recruits from the Week 10 recruiting, so that box is empty. But that's our rankings. Honestly, that's the show. I appreciate you guys listening to me ramble, especially a lot about Kentucky this week. I have been put off on them. I'm starting to get excited. I figured a few things out because of how great this community is. I've talked to Sweezy, I've talked to Sarge, I've talked to a few other guys a lot in depth about not just, you know, the SEC and college football as a whole, but they have helped me understand what is going on with my football team, and I'm starting to get excited again. And it's the death knell. Every time I get put in rankings, I lose. But they've got Kentucky ranked in the college football playoff. I think there's a real chance if we can win out to do something special that I didn't expect. Some people kind of expected at the beginning of the season, but I was like, nah, that's not going to happen. It's now a possibility, and that is because of the people that are in this community, how tight this community is, and how willing we are to help each other. Maybe after they beat us first, but they still want everybody to succeed. So if you have made it to the end of this almost 45-minute video and you are not in this community and you're just like, what the heck is this? And you just wanted to watch to see it, I want you to understand, yes, it's college football. College basketball is coming up as well. NFL is going on. NBA is about to start up for the first time in 2 years. That's all great. Yes, we're here to play sports. The community here is so helpful to each other. They're so wanting to pull each other up that I can't appreciate it enough. So thank you to you guys. I if I didn't say it to you directly, I'm saying it here now. Um, now that I've both played you guys, I hope you continue to win, except for when you play me. And I really want everybody else to learn, be successful, and just have fun. I mean, even if you're losing, all the whole point is to have fun, right? So appreciate you guys. I'll try and check in next week and get more consistent with this. I think with this new format, with a few things you saw that might have been a little bit more new, it's going to be a lot easier. Going to be not so put off as, oh man, I got to do this now. So thank you. Again, if you're still here, check out the description, check the links, come check us out. I'll see you guys.